Okay, I think we'll get started as it's a couple of minutes past 3 o'clock. We're due to kick off at three. I'll see if anybody else joins us. We'll let them in as they arrive. So first of all, say good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for joining us and coming along to this latest of our webinar Wednesday series. Today's webinar is all about unlocking efficiency with time tracking, and that's going to be presented by our trusted partners from riteSOFT. Before we get started with the webinar, though, I'd just like to handle a few housekeeping items. First of all, just to remind everybody that we do record our webinars, and those recordings are then available online on our YouTube channel. This one should be available in a couple of days' time. So if you have got any colleagues that haven't been able to come along, they'll be able to see that online later. I'm going to keep everybody on mute during the presentation, and just so that we can get through the content, so without too much disturbance. But we will be having a Q&A session at the end, so there'll be plenty of opportunity to ask questions. If you have any questions as we go along throughout the webinar, please feel free to put them either in the Q&A section or the chat window within Teams. I know some people for some reason can't see the Q&A if they're using the web version of Teams, but the chat window should be there. And as we go through, I'll try and monitor those, and we'll cover any of the questions off as we go. But as I say, we'll also have a Q&A session at the very end to cover off any other questions that you might have. So, getting into the actual webinar today, first of all, just to let everybody know who I am. My name's Andrew Longland. I'm the Managing Director of riteTechnology. We're a CISPRO Premium Solutions partner in the UK. We're hosting this webinar, but we're doing that in partnership with our colleagues from riteSOFT in the USA, and I'll introduce those guys shortly. But before I do that, I just want to ask, could you put into the chat window, just so I can get a bit of an idea, how are you guys capturing time at the moment within your organisations, both from a payroll perspective, but also from a work in progress and manufacturing job perspective? If you wouldn't mind just putting some answers into the chat window as we get going, and I'll have a look at those once our colleagues from riteSOFT and start their presentation, and maybe we'll have a bit of a chat through some of that. And I can see some people are starting to do that already, which is fantastic. Thank you. So moving on, I'm very happy to introduce our two presenters today from our partner riteSOFT, and we have Garrett Lenzen and Ryan Heslop with us, both of whom are account managers and implementation specialists from riteSOFT, who are the authors of both riteScan and riteTIME. Perhaps Garrett, you could just give us a bit of a background on who riteSOFT are, please.
Yes, no, thank you, Andrew, and thank you, HIT, for having us today. It's always a great opportunity to be in front of you guys to communicate what ultimately this solution can do for your businesses. So from a riteSOFT perspective, riteSOFT has been in the CISPRO space for 18 years now, so a long-standing relationship with HIT Technologies and CISPRO as a whole, working all together and jointly to make the best solution overall for their customers. So whether if that is from a WMS perspective, from a labor collection perspective, and just all the way how it wraps into CISPRO. So being that we've been in the CISPRO space for such a long time, we really leverage HIT's CISPRO knowledge on ultimately how to make our solutions better. Now, our goal for our solutions itself is to make them as smart, simple, and seamless as possible, with the ultimate goal of this being focused on those end users, right? We know end users, at the end of the day, we want to make that solution as easy for them to use, so that way they can adopt the solution and use the solution to achieve those expected efficiencies that we're looking for, which one of these simple solutions, the goal with that is to bring that standardized process, right? We want to focus on having standard processes throughout the entirety of your business. So not just what you do in accounting, what you do in financials, what you do with inventory, but even with tracking time, being able to have a standard process, making it easy to follow, easy to train, and keeping that going, because standardization is going to allow your business ultimately to scale. All right. So Ryan,
Excellent.
over to you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Garrett. I appreciate it. So, just like this slide says, so is your time tracking solution holding you back? So something we hear from manufacturers in all different industries is that their time tracking solution, if they have one, may be holding them back from achieving higher efficiencies and gains for really one of two key reasons. First, they're not hitting efficiency targets due to some sort of process or system limitation, and or they might lack just job or employee visibility, which can then help them identify issues, control costs, do more accurate job costing. So these things might sound familiar to some of you guys. I see in the chat that a few of you guys might not be doing any sort of time tracking today. So we're going to highlight just a few customer stories here as we move on in the presentation. So moving right along into our first customer story. So we all know that efficiency really is what makes the manufacturer's world go round, right? So surprisingly, with one of our customers here in Ohio, and so in the stateside, it really came down to more of a legacy system requirements that weren't compatible with newer operating systems or the latest hardware. Garrett, can you maybe share a little bit about what was holding them back with their productivity?
Absolutely, absolutely. So with this customer, it all really started about they have an existing time tracking solution. Now, the thing with their existing time tracking solution, it was focused purely on WIP, not anywhere from a time roll or time payroll perspective. But the best thing about that was it was holding them back from moving to upgrading their system. So talking about their server, it was holding them back from updating their server. So they went from 2008, Windows Server 2008, now moving to riteTIME allowed them ultimately to move up to Windows Server, say 2020 or 2016, 2019 as well. So really taking those leaps forward, because what that does of not being able to upgrade your environments or your systems, it poses you to security risks, slowness, and all those are different things that can really hold you back as a business. So, from a solution standpoint, that was one of the areas that led them to look for something new. Then, when we get into the meat and potatoes of identifying what their needs were, we were really looking to reduce a lot of the entry that they would do into this previous system. So taking away from any manual time clock punches, right? So they would come in, enter into the system, enter how much time they spent, and post it. So currently, they would go through with payroll, they would do a manual entry, and then somebody in the office would take that manual entry and enter it into their payroll system. Then on the labor side, they would go into that legacy solution, enter any of their data of what they were collecting, and then using that to ultimately post into SysPro. Now, again, with that, it was holding them back. So that's one of the changes that they decided to make was they wanted a new solution that's not only going to do the same functions, but allow them to grow into different areas of number one, collecting your time roll or your time clock punches and your labor punches within one system and being able to distribute that to the various solutions that require it. So they used Paylocity as their payroll system, and then obviously SysPro as their ERP. So being able to distribute that information in real time. Then some of the things that were driving them that were new to them as a system was really the advanced approvals process, being able to schedule different jobs and operations to different employees or departments, and then even looking further into the time of reporting and dashboards. So understanding what exactly is happening out there, being able to collect those metric information, share reports, and just get a glimpse of what's actually happening out there on the warehouse floor. All right.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Garrett. It's really useful to hear that the story behind some of these customers that you've been dealing with. Ryan, can I ask you, what's another key reason that a manufacturer would be looking to upgrade their time tracking system?
Yeah, no, good question. I mean, really, it's when people start looking at their more manual, if they have manual processes and they want to start automating some of those processes. That's really where riteTIME can come into play. I mean, really, if we look at our second customer story, it might highlight that a little bit better. So kind of going into our second customer story here. So we're looking at an electrical transformer manufacturer, also here on the state side. And we all know that the goal of every business is to make money. And to make money, you need to make decisions based on facts and data. So to collect some of that data, to make decisions based on facts and data, they can use a time tracking solution like a riteTIME to collect data, automate their time tracking solutions, and make decisions based off of those. So really, this manufacturer, they really had a big need to track time against, or to gain more visibility into what's happening on their shop floor, not only to identify issues, but to help with their accuracy in job costing. And really, this is all to get them to meet that end goal to make more money. Garrett, can you maybe talk about how upgrading to the time tracking process may help these guys out?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the key issues that this customer came to us with was that they were doing everything manual today. So they didn't have any pre-existing systems. So again, that's the same thing for payroll, and it was the same thing for jobs. Everything was done manually. So what they were doing when they're talking from a SysPro perspective was they were just issuing the expected amount of time or their standard amount of labor that they would think they had for every single job. Now, this is a very large customer. They have over 300 people using riteTIME. So being able to collect time for all of those employees can drastically skew actually the actual amount of time that's collected for any given job. So you could be off by hours and hours and hours against any given area, which is going to create a large discrepancy in the actual cost of that production run. So understanding that they had an issue and they looked to solve it with a system like riteTIME to be able to, number one, collect all of that data and bring it into the system, right? Because tracking time can be easy with systems, but without systems, it can be difficult because it's manual. You're writing the time down on a time card or a piece of paper or a traveler, turning it into someone to read that said handwriting and then enter it into a system. All of those areas that I just described are areas for mistakes. So being able to bring in a system that does that for us by them selecting a button or scanning a barcode and selecting what they're going to be working on and importing it directly into SysPro saves all of that time from you from an overhead perspective to get to that accurate amount of time. Now, what they're doing as future state here is they're leveraging riteTIME as a quick start. So it's set up as kiosks out on the floor, being able to have different groups of users and departments go to these kiosks, select their job and their operation that they're working on, and then take that, report it back into riteTIME, and then I, as the management or their management team, is taking that data, understanding, based off of the actual time spent versus the expected time. How close are they? Is there a large discrepancy? Are they close? And that helps them understand what should their new expected time or their new standard time be overall for that given type of job, right? And that's going to be more accurate going forward from a quoting perspective, understanding how much time it takes to do a job like this so you can properly allocate labor resources and so on. So that's one of the areas that this organization really saw riteTIME being a benefit to them.
Excellent. Thanks, Garrett. And before Garrett switches over to the demo of riteTIME, perhaps Ryan, I can ask you to just give everyone a brief description on what riteTIME is and what it does, please.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, before Garrett gets switched over to the demo, and so you get to see riteTIME in action for yourself. Let's just quick summarize, what riteTIME is and what it may do for you guys. So kind of like Garrett spoke about earlier, riteTIME is a simple web-based plug-and-play time tracking and scheduling solution. It is something that we do pride ourselves in the speed of the implementation. It's a very quick implementation, and it does come at, I must say, a pretty cost-effective price point. It does help you achieve improved visibility and efficiency and accuracy with features that can streamline your time and attendance, automate time tracking on jobs and tasks by employee. You can look at work centers and machines. It simplifies your job scheduling by assigning tasks to users. And really, you can add jobs and task prompts and so much more. And also, one of the great things about riteTIME is that it can run on any device that has a browser. So it also does come with a native Android application or an iOS mobile app if you have Apple or Apple devices that can help you track your employees really anywhere they are. So with all of that being said, and me spewing all that out to you, Garrett, are you ready for the demo?
Oh, always, always. It's the best part about any webinar, right? Is being able to see the solution in action. And it's ultimately my favorite part of the whole process as well. So we're going to dive straight into it. Now, what we're going to do with this demo is we are going to tie back to those customer stories just a little bit so you can see essentially how are they going to go about doing these different processes. So we're going to follow the flow of just what a general employee is doing on a day-to-day basis by tracking their time within a system like this, okay? And then we're going to move over to how a manager, supervisor, administrator is going to see what data is collected, make decisions based off that data that's collected, and then I'll identify where does this data need to go, right? And that is going to follow that flow of we collect the inventory or we collect the information, report against the information. Information is dispersed either into a payroll system or say SysPro as your ERP, and it updates your labor within the systems, right? So the first thing that we're going to start with is what we call quick start. So quick start is ultimately an area within an application or within riteTIME that's going to be deployed within different, say, work centers, different departments, or different areas around the floor for users to access and easily apply how much time that they are spending or proactively starting by clocking in and clocking out, right? So we want to make sure that it's easy for them to get to, so they're not having to stand in lines or having to write things down on pieces of paper. We want to make it as easy as possible. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a general end user and we're going to sign in. Now, there's a few different methods for signing in. And again, it's all about ease of use. For a lot of users and organizations, we just use a simple username and password to sign in. To streamline that even further, you can scan a barcode with their username credentials, whether if that's a barcode that's on a badge on a hip, or if it's in a book somewhere, or if it's within their work center that they're constantly working in or that they're assigned to. And then even we can take it a step further is setting up a different kiosk where you can use a PIN or maybe an employee number or an ID that allows them to sign in with that ID. So different methods. Each organization is a little bit different in how they want to go about doing it, but it all allows for streamlining that login process, right? Because one of my biggest things whenever I'm working with a customer on site and seeing this in action, I hate when I see them lining up at say 4 o'clock when the shift is over and they have to line up to punch in. That means the system is not as efficient. So we want to make sure that that process is clean and effective. So what we're going to do is we're going to sign in as Eric Adams. He's going to be our first general operator employee that's doing the actual work against a given job and operation. So we're going to take his username and password and we're going to log in. Now, once we log in, we're going to see our quick start screen here. So there's a couple key pieces of data just on the top, right? I'm currently clocking in for the day, right? I just got into the facility. I'm putting my lunch away. I'm ready to start my day. So I see my status is out for day currently. My last clock out time was 7:19 a few days ago. And my total week hours so far is at 40 hours. Now I'm going to be maybe working overtime, but it's just information for me to understand where am I at as that employee. So we're going to start in for day, and that's going to punch us in from a time clock perspective. Now, the best part about riteTIME is it's so configurable to your processes that you have today that you could use it for just time clock punches. You could use it for time clock punches and your job punches, or you could just use it for your job punches. It's really going to configure to the processes that you're looking to automate, right? So being flexible in how you deploy the system out. So now once we've clocked in for the day and we're tracking our time clock punch, the next thing typically for that user is to clock into a job. Now, again, every environment's a little bit different with how you distribute jobs to the different users on what they're supposed to be working on. I've seen it on work whiteboards, throughout the different locations in the facility. I've seen it job travelers. So there's a variety of different ways that you're communicating this. So one way that we see commonly is a job traveler or a work order packet that flows with the product that's moving through your facility. One quick thing that you can do is you can actually put barcodes on those travelers to scan to be able to select the job that you're working on. So I scan it, makes it that much easier instead of me having to type things in. But for today's scenario, we're going to just hit my start job button, and I'm going to be able to go through my list and select what job I'm going to be working on. So we're going to start with a simple B100. We're going to assemble some bicycles. So now once I select my job, I can select the operation that I'm going to be working on. Again, this is coming from SysPro. So we select, and now one of the nice things with this is I can collect additional information in what we call prompts. Every business is looking at ways to how do we gather more, because more information ultimately makes you make more effective decisions. So I want to know what machine is he working on and what work center is he working in, and then I can start. Now, the nice thing with those prompts is you can enforce them, you can make them required. So a user has to enter content in that location. Or again, you can make it to where it's just an optional thing. And if they need to or want to, for whatever reason, they can apply that content in those fields. But again, all has a purpose. So now we've clocked into my job, and ultimately as the user, I would log out and I would go to start physically working on that given job and that operation. So we're going to log back in as Eric here, just so we can see a couple things that they can access when they're in that quick start screen. So we're going to log back in. Now, when I'm looking at this, I want to look at, okay, what information is important to me as a user, right? Sometimes there's systems that are going to help us communicate information to those end users without me verbally telling them or writing it on a whiteboard or having it noted in that traveler or work order packet. Within riteTIME, it's going to allow you to add different attachments to a given job and operation to view pieces of content, or even me as a floor employee add pieces of content for somebody else to view, maybe that supervisor in the system. So it's a system of sharing data ultimately back and forth. So one of the common practices or use cases for this would be blueprints. I know businesses have blueprints for product that they're developing or building. So we want to make sure that we can easily access and see what those blueprints are for this given product. Is it a cycle? Like what do they have to do? Is it the different work steps that they have to go through within this operation? So I could easily go into my own system and just add any piece of information, whether if it's a picture, add attachment, and now that attachment can be shared, found throughout the system, and it's associated to that given job. Okay. And the next thing would be just different notes. Again, it's methods of communications within a system without having to be out there and talking physically to somebody, right? So it's just notifying somebody of something. So if we take this, I want to enter a note. So we're doing webinar, right? And I add my note, and that note is now visible from this employee to the supervisor against the job. A method for this would be communicating that there might have been an issue against this, or the issue that was previously found has been resolved, right? So it's ways just to communicate ultimately what's going on within this given job and operation. So now say I've worked 4 hours against this given job and we're going to hit stop. So I've got my big red stop button, and it's going to bring up some of my stop prompts. So again, it's just different collecting of data. So if I have scrap, I want to apply a reason for scrap. If I want to collect my good quantity that's produced. If I want to collect my scrap quantity, or if I need to do any sort of quality checks, I can do those things. It's just asking the users questions of what did they do at the end of this job. I can mark it complete. So if you're using like milestone operations within SysPro, you can use the complete button to mark that as your milestone operation, which then allows me to work on the next operation within that job, right? So just following the flow of what SysPro is also providing us. So we're going to hit stop. Oh, now see, this one is required. So I do have to enter content into that field to allow me to go forward. So let's make sure we hit yes. All right, so these are just different things that you're going to see from if I'm not entering it, right? So it's all feedback to the user, which is important in any environment. We want to make sure that they are aware of the mistakes that they're making, not to the point where it's made it all the way up to the supervisor and it's approved in SysPro and everything else. We want to validate that right there, right then, so that they can make the change to make it work. All right. So that would be the general quick start workflow for these users. So we're going to leave him in, and now we're going to make a shift, right? So being that Ryan already mentioned earlier today that this is a web-based system and it can deploy to a variety of different, devices out there on the floor, it's easy for users just to come in to, say, Google Chrome, for example, and access the application. So we're going to actually switch this over to what I would call more of a desktop view, right? We're going to be able to go in as Eric as a different type of employee. Eric could be also an engineer. So we as engineers still need to apply our time, but we're more in an office setting. So we have access to riteTIME in a little bit different manner, which is I want to be able to log into the application and I want to see all of my different jobs that are available to me and select them from that list. So we're going to log in here as Eric again. Once we log in, see the views are going to shift just a little bit. So it's all dependent upon the role that he's in, right? So Eric now has visibility into different methods of, say, dashboards. So I'm going to look at Eric here, and we're going to actually look at Eric's My Jobs view. So again, we can see that he's still clocked into that one job. But we're also going to look at the different available jobs that he can work on. Now, again, every business is different, so you want to have different methods of collecting that time. When you're in engineers or in an office setting, you're constantly switching from task to task to task, so it becomes difficult to track the amount of time that was spent. So a lot of employees in that role do a lot of retroactive time collection. So you can do that by purely just going to a given job and operation and selecting add time, which will allow me as a user to apply how much time I spent, and I can add those hours at any given point in time, right? It's all set up on how you want to distribute those permissions to your different users, but it's going to accommodate for the different workflows that you might see in any given scenario, right? So I can see this information, and now Eric, as an engineer, also needs to be able to drill into the job information even further. So he needs to see what's the calculated total time that's spent. Is there any expected time that's against this job? Is this an R&D job? What is it ultimately? So I need to drill into that detail even further and get that understanding of what's going on. So like if we go back here, we're going to look at that job of B100 in my jobs view, select my B100, and we can see that for demo purpose, my expected time was 3.75 hours, but my calculated total time is at 1,300 hours. We're way over. What's happening? Like what's going on within this environment that we need to fix to get this to be accurate? Or is that something that is consistent, right? So it allows us to bring up those questions and really understand the issues behind them. And then last for a different user is being able to see their own personal time card, right? So we want to be able to see where did I, as Eric, spend my time within my 40-hour work week. So I can understand how productive am I, hold myself as an employee accountable for the work that I'm ultimately doing. So we can see here as my total hours is about 40 hours this week, which is great. Nothing from an overtime perspective, but my task hours is only about 25 hours. So one thing that we do is we calculate the productivity of that user. So we're at roughly 62% productivity, and productivity is calculated by my task hours over my total hours. So really 60% of the time I'm actually working on a job. One thing that I typically recommend to any organization is that, yes, you have to accommodate for breaks and things of that nature throughout the day, but we're looking for about that 75% threshold in productivity. So if I'm working a 40-hour work week, I should be working about at least 32 hours on a given task, right? So maintaining productivity. And I can see my different areas that I've worked throughout that given time period. So it's just a way, again, for me to hold myself accountable, understand where I worked. Am I even making my 40 hours for this week? Am I meeting my expectations that are set for me? All right. So then we're going to log out here and we're going to switch this over then to an administrator's view. So we're going to see a little bit more information on screen. It's going to be similar, but we're going to switch over. So we're going to take my admin user and we're going to sign in as my admin user. And we'll log in again, similar information, but you can see the dashboard has expanded. So this dashboard is going to be the first area that I log into every single time. I use this dashboard to get a sense of what is happening out there on the floor. What is Eric and the employees doing out there on that floor? So this is an area that when we talked about RBB really growing into an application, they're looking to leverage the dashboards to understand where is that time being spent. So if it's going to see the number of active jobs that they have, or if it's seeing the number of hours per job, they can bring that from a report into their dashboard and really drill down into the nitty-gritty details and get a clear understanding of what's happening. So if I expand upon this hours per job, brings me right into a report for me to understand here's all this transactions that were done, and it gets me that total time that was spent. So just visibility is extremely important. So we're looking at this. All right. Now, again, we've collected our time, right? The employees have gone through and they've collected their time. Now, what do we need to do as supervisors? We need to make sure that the time and the jobs that they've worked on is ultimately correct. So we're going to come in and we're going to go into our supervisor drop down here, and we're going to go through and review the time that is ultimately collected and making sure that these pieces of data can go to the other systems that we require. Now, there's a few different methods of doing this, and each organization will be different, right, to accommodate for the workflows. So one area is my time card approval. This helps me break it down by my given employee to understand where was their time spent. So I like to look at Eric. We're going to select, drop his down to see where all of his time was spent and understand exactly what was happened. So he's got his time clock punches, lunch unpaid punches for his breaks, the job punches, and so on. Now, with part of this, I can look at my different KPIs. So if I'm looking at this user specifically, again, I get to understand where was the time spent. So work hours was about 62% of his time, right? Unproductive time, he had about 37% of unproductive time. Where was his time split overall from a job perspective? And then if he is tracking quality, where's his good versus his scrap quantity at, from a percentage and a number perspective. So it gives you just information to help make a decision. Like you can put different metrics or benchmarks in place based off the data that's provided to you to make decisions. Like if he's at a 50-50 for his good versus his scrap quantity, we got to talk to Eric. Is he doing something wrong within that job and that operation, or what is happening to where we're scrapping that many pieces out, right? And that's all due to the information we collected previously. And we can see timelines and overviews and really some of that nice to have stuff. But ultimately, we need to approve his time, right? So I can do it a few ways. I can go through and select each specific transaction and approve it, or I can just select Eric as a whole and choose to approve all of his transactions. And the key thing with the approvals is using this system to catch any mistakes that were made. There's going to be scenarios where users forget to clock out. There's going to be scenarios where they clock out too soon and they continue to work on something. So we want to make sure we're catching those mistakes here before we send that data to another system like SysPro. So now once I have approved it, that's what's marking it as, yep, that system is now being pushed to payroll and it's also being pushed to SysPro, and it's ultimately out of my queue as a manager to be concerned about. So that's one way to break it up by employee. Now, the second way that I personally like is one of my favorite areas is just purely by transaction. So if I want to look at what's happening here, this is my transactions view. Now you can see that we've got different columns of how we segment the data, and I can get different filters against it. So I have a filter against this specific work center. So it allows you to filter down to get to the nitty-gritty data that I'm looking for. So this just shows me every single transaction for all employees. And you might notice that there is these little yield signs or markers against specific transactions. And I'll show you that report in a second, but these are issues, what we call issues. So you can set up an issues list in riteTIME to be able to basically place a flag on a transaction for review, making it easier because there's so much data nowadays that we're always working through. We want to make sure that we can have a visual cue to call out against a transaction to make adjustments or to review. So if I'm looking at John Phillip here and we've got an issue, transaction was not approved, that's an old time transaction. So what do we need to do to resolve that? And that's likely going to be the same theme for a lot of these, but it clearly calls it out. So now I can go through again and I can select each transaction that I do want to approve and go through my approval process that way. Or if I need to, I can choose to edit these transactions. I can delete them. I can change the amount of time that was spent against them, right? So it's all about how do I get and confirm the data is correct that was collected by these users. So we're going to take John here and we're going to edit his transaction and we will adjust the amount of time that was spent from 8.7 to just from 9.7, excuse me, to 8.7. Save. Now that should be correct, and we can ultimately approve that transaction. Again, it's ready to be set. So just different methodologies of how do we approve the time that is ultimately collected. And you can see now that that marker against that transaction has now disappeared. Now, being that this system, likely for any SysPro user, is going to be installed locally on your environment, it has a full SQL backend for you. And ultimately what that means to you as a business is you can access that data for further reporting purposes and really just drilling into what is available. So content that's collected, right? We talked about that. So we want to see the history that's behind it, the start, the stop, the total time, when it was approved and who it was approved by. So you always have that audit trail of, well, if mistakes are made, I can sure come back in and understand what mistakes were made. So that way we can rectify them, correct them, and make sure those things don't happen again from a training perspective. So the details, the history, even location, and getting an understanding of what exactly happened. All right, so it's approved. Once it's approved, it's out. It goes back to all my different systems of payroll and SysPros I've said a few times here, and it just leaves us now to the nice to have features of what riteTIME can offer you, right? When we're looking at efficiencies overall as a business, now that we've got the basics down of collecting time, taking the time and approving the time and verifying the transactions are correct, how do we improve upon that, right? So different methods to be able to improve upon that is how do we get this time or these things scheduled to different employees? So we're going to look at our scheduling tools. We have really two of them. One is just a visual scheduling, which is more a drag and drop into just a bucket, which could be a user, a department, a day. Or we also have what we call calendar scheduling, which calendar scheduling is going to allow you to look at a calendar view to be able to drag and assign the given job and operation to a specific employee. So if we're going to look at this afternoon, right, and we need to schedule time, and actually let's go to tomorrow, let's go to the 18th. So we're going to look at all of my employees that I have in the system. It's only 4 of us, and we need to schedule their time. So I'm going to look and filter through my jobs, right? I'm going to filter through them, find the jobs that need to be worked off of. It can be based off of start date that comes from SysPro or expected due dates, really anything that you need to filter against. And we're going to take our job and we're going to drag it onto my calendar. So starting at 8 a.m., the admin is going to be working on B112, and he's going to work on that until 12 p.m., until noon. So that's going to be 4 hours of time for that given job. Now I can do that from a job perspective, and I can also do it from a task perspective. So within that job, he needs to work on this for an hour and needs to work on this specific operation for 3 hours based off of how much time it ultimately takes. So it's a really nice chart to be able to drag and drop and get a visual understanding of where are people working, and then also where's our gaps. So if we have 9 working hours in our day, and I'm scheduling these things out for this user, well, that's a 2 hour gap there. So maybe I have an hour-long job that I can apply into that area, right? To keep them working, to keep them moving through and help manage our productivity. So this really helps communicate to the user what's supposed to be worked on and how do they go about doing that. So one thing to think about is just scheduling as you grow into this method of tracking your time. Now, when I see schedules, right, talking schedules, I want to be able to see my calendar view, and there's my jobs that have been scheduled for me on my specific calendar. So I know what my expectation should be from tomorrow coming into work, that I got to work on these 3 things at minimum. Okay. Now, as part of all this, you're going to be able to see your different users, the different departments that you have, and just getting the sense of the state of where everybody is at within these given operations, right? Now, again, I mentioned that scenario of people lining up, right? You might have more of a line-driven facility where you always have 10 people that are going to the same area to work on the same job. So one thing you can do with that is a general group punch. So group punches allow you to take different employees and punch them all in, whether if it's in for day or if it's going to be in for a specific job. Just allows you really to, again, get people to be clocked in as accurately and as efficiently as possible. I don't want those 10 people to line up, punch in, punch in, punch in, punch in. I can do it all if they're all going to be working in the same general area, right? So it's just ease of use, right? How do we want to control what they're doing? And last but not least, to cover this, right, is talking about the reports. So reports are endless, right? You can create the reports that you deem necessary to collect the information that you deem necessary. So if we're going to look at, say, my job hours report, I want to be able to get an understanding of where is the time being spent. Now, with these reports, you can do a lot of things. Obviously, you can filter against them, make them really however you want them to be. So I'm grouping by my employee and where they're spending their time. So I see for this specific employee on B100, Cynthia spent 33 hours in total time against that specific job. That's a lot of time in 1 week for one job. Eric, 0 or 1, whatever it might be. It's just an example of a report. Now with these reports, you can export them to a PDF or to Excel to be able to share this information, right? Because not everybody in your organization, like CFOs or leadership teams, will always be in this application itself. So how do we share that information to other stakeholders in the business? I can export this to PDF, and that's going to then be a PDF file that I can share out to whomever that we deem necessary to have that information. Or last, you can export it to Excel, right? And then be able to do any further conditional formatting against it if there's any equations that you need to do. And you can take an Excel file and you can actually do an import into any disparate system. For companies that don't like to do integrations, right? They can take this as a freestanding system, export an Excel or CSV file, take that exported file, import it into, say, a payroll system, right? Just allows them for complete, utter autonomy. And then again, these reports bring it back to my dashboard for me to view that content of everything that was collected, from payroll hours to active jobs to hours per job, active users, and so on. So that really follows the life cycle of how is someone going to be using this system, from logging their time, clocking in and clocking out, to clocking in as more of an engineer or office-based employee, to then us approving and reporting against the time that was collected. And then really some of those nicer to have things of being able to schedule as we grow into these time collection processes. scheduling, group punching employees, reporting against all the data that's ultimately collected. And we do that day in and day out, day in and day out, and ultimately have more accurate costing against our jobs and more accurate time clock punches and so on. So that wraps it up from a demonstration perspective, and we'll bring it back over here and really start opening it up for Q&A. So if you guys have any questions, there is the Q&A section in the chat here. You feel free to enter any questions that you might have. We'll be able to answer any of those questions as we go here.
That's great. Thanks, Garrett. Really appreciate you spending the time going through all of that with us. As Garrett said, there is the Q&A option within Teams, but if you can't see that, there's the chat option as well, which I think everybody should be able to see. Feel free to put any questions you've got there, and I will facilitate them and ask Garrett and Ryan to give you the answers. I can see someone is frantically typing away now. Oh, right. We have our first question in the Q&A. This is from Toby Humphreys. Does marking a job as complete in riteTIME receipt a job in SysPro, or does that remain a separate function?
Great question, Toby. That is a separate function. So marking it incomplete in riteTIME is purely just marking it complete within riteTIME and the operation complete. So it does not mark the job complete itself or perform a job receipt within SysPro. It's purely just from a time perspective. So if you're looking at a WIP query in SysPro and you see your operation allocations, you're going to see either a Y or an N in those columns. So no would be for it's not complete, and Y would be for yes, it is complete. That's really what that checkbox complete is marking. So you would still go through your typical job complete process in SysPro.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. We got a question in chat from Sarah, which says, what's the difference between using using riteTIME versus using the labour track part of riteScan for capturing time against jobs?
Yeah, great question, Sarah. So the key with that is riteTIME is really much more of an expanded solution for tracking time. So if you're going to look at it, two areas is identifying how important is the reporting and the approvals process for this. So riteScan's labor track module does not have a approvals process within it. So that means it's posted immediately back to SysPro. Now within riteTIME, they have the approvals process, which again, it's optional. So it can be either posted directly back to SysPro, or you can go through your approvals process. So it's just putting further control within riteTIME around that collection of information and pushing it into SysPro. So that's one of the big two differences around it. I would just say riteTIME is far more advanced in that time tracking methodology than riteScan's labor is going to be. But it's always good to start simple and grow in as your needs changes.
Excellent. Thanks, Garrett. I think that makes quite a bit of sense. Next question is from Ian, who asks, could you access riteTIME and riteScan within the same web page or portal?
Within the same web page, no, they would technically operate as two separate browsers, browser tabs, because they're both now web-based applications. So it's very, very similar to how one another operates, but no, they'd be separate pages and then say a Google Chrome tab browser.
Makes sense. Thank you. At the moment, I don't think we have any further questions. Let me just double check. Nothing more at the minute. Please feel free, if anybody does have any other questions, stick them in either the chat or the Q&A. Just come in. Okay, this one from Alistair. Can riteScan integrate with riteTIME?
Great question. Great question. There's definitely future plans on the roadmap to really make it more of a solution overall between RiteScan and riteTIME, but as of right now, they are operating as two separate solutions. So there is definitely roadmap items for it, but at this time they do operate as separate. So there is not a current integration between the two.
Makes sense. Thank you.
That is great feedback for the future as to what it could be.
Yeah. I think sometimes these sessions are actually useful to get product development ideas as well, aren't they?
Market research is important too.
Excellent. Okay, so I was about to say there's no more questions, but another one's just popped in. Okay, so this is Toby again. I think have we got? Okay, yeah. So does the marking of the job as complete issue the labour in SysPro for that operation? If so, does it issue the expected labour or the actual labour time that's been recorded?
Okay. Just making sure I'm understanding that, Toby. So riteTIME is going to issue the actual amount of labor time that is recorded. So that's what it's going to issue if you mark it complete or that operation complete. So we do an actual, it's the actual amount of time, not the expected time.
Yeah. I think that's one of the key advantages. A lot of customers that we see are just posting their expected times from the routings, which means you're not getting any true performance data from it. So there's a key advantage for riteTIME to get that information and see the productivity. And as you were saying earlier in your presentation, driving down the values that you see in your routings or potentially moving them up, but it means you're getting more accurate costings, which is critical to obviously margins and profitability.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think we are probably done. I can't see any other questions coming in, but thank you for those that have come through, and thank you for attending as well. It's always good to see good turnout for these webinars. We try to do one every single month with a different vendor. Seems to be going quite well at the moment. Got quite a number of people on this one, which is great to see. If you do have any other questions, or if you want to learn any more about the riteTIME product or even riteScan as well, please do feel free to reach out to either ourselves at riteTechnology or directly to the guys at riteSOFT. Either way is good. We stay in touch with each other very regularly anyway, and collaborate on projects across the UK. So yeah, please do reach out to us with any inquiries. As you can see, our details are on the screen there. I think most people on this session know where we are anyway, at least, and have relationships with us. So once again, thank you for coming along. Also, massive thank you to Garrett and Ryan for their efforts and their presentation and the demo today. It's been very, very useful. Lots to learn, lots to take away. And I hope to see all of you on our next webinar, which is I think off the top of my head, it's the third Wednesday in August. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Andrew.
Yep. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you coming.
Bye now.